The next speaker actually needs no introduction at all. If you have ever stepped inside Tamil Nadu, one of the passport of being a Tamilian or being in Tamil Nadu, you would have definitely encountered somebody called Dr. Sudha Seshayyan. Her illustrious career spans for more than 30 years in the areas of academics, anatomy, authorship, and publication and administration. She served as the Vice Principal of Madras Medical College since 2011. Previously, she served as the Registrar of the Tamil Nadu Dr. MGR Medical University. She has authored books other than medical journals, Tevara Tiruvula Sri Lalita, Treatise on Lalita Sahasranamam, Varkai Vasapadum, சப்தஸ்தான ஸ்தலங்கள், ஸ்ரீ மாதவாச்சாரியா, படிவங்கள் எப்படியோ, தாய் தன்னை அறியாதா, ராமன் எத்தனை ராமனடி, வேத மந்த்ராஸ், இந்த நூற்றாண்டில் இந்து மதம், இந்து மத அற்புதங்கள், தாயே நீயே துணை, நல்ல தரிசனம், பஞ்ச சபைகள், a book on history on Lemuria, பேசும் பரம்பொருள், தேவாரத்தேன், சீர்காழி மூவர், அந்தகால மருத்துவங்கள், a biography, Kudumbamum Desamum, and also a quiz whiz. Can you capsule all these in 1 hour and give us, please? We welcome Dr. Sudha Seshayyan.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I was listening to the previous speaker for about the last 30 minutes. And I really wonder as to what I'm going to tell you at this point of time when much has been already discussed. Nevertheless, my presentation, call it whatever you want, will be very simple. Deliberately, I have no designs on my slides, plain white. Just sprinkling certain thoughts which probably would kindle teachers and educators as to what situation we are in today and what we could do further. Thanks to the organizers, they told me it's moral education. Timelessness of moral education is the title that's been given. Many of you might wonder as to why I have not changed the old-fashioned phrase moral education. We are in times where the concept of moral education has been changed. If you utter the phrase moral education, you're considered old-fashioned, you're obsolete. It's become character education. And why this change? Precisely the reason that my previous speaker was talking about, to de-link religion from moral education. One way of de-linking religion had been to make it character education. Morality is considered to be part of religion, or religion is considered to be part of morality. But my dear friends, I prefer to keep it as moral education. I personally believe that morality has nothing to do with religious rituals. So I would stick to the term moral education. And before going into a review of moral education in relation to the present scenario, before going into the justification of the timelessness of moral education, I would like to ask a few questions and then probably run through a set of answers which would include even the history of moral education and then derive at what we should. Now, do I need to point it? Right. What is moral education? It's a very, very general term. If I pick out each one of you and ask you as to what moral education is, define moral education, each one of you would give a different definitions which would be as variable as the universe is. Probably we can include two things there: moral socialization, which will mean training or nurturing virtues and values that make good people. Now, I've made the word good within quotes because good, again, is extremely relative. We'll come back to that a little later. Socialization on the moral perspective would be to put in certain values into the mind of the child, into the mind of the pupil, and nurture these values so that the child or the pupil develops into a good individual. Now, this also includes moral maturity, wherein the pupil or the student is expected to become a responsible individual, make responsible judgments in matters of moral importance. When I say matters of moral importance, these include areas where there could be controversies. Controversial matters where judgments would be required to be made. Now, the basic question is, can morality be taught, if at all? Can morality be taught? What exactly is being moral? Now, something which you and me would vouchsafe as moral, somebody else in a different part of the world would say is not part of morality. So, what exactly is defined as being moral is again a moot area. Will the same principle of morality apply to everyone at all times? Now, the corollary of the earlier two questions would be the third question. But then, these three questions can be thought from the social perspective. Now, there was a question about religion being de-linked from moral education. Let me tell you this. When did moral education come into implementation? I'll run through some of these slides. We'll come back a little later. Now, this is this. When did moral education start? We all have been saying, many of us here would say, no, when I was a child in school, there was moral education. We had separate moral education classes. Now, when did this all start? If you go into the history of the development of moral education, as it is termed, you would see there was no separate moral education class or curriculum or syllabus or moral education emphasis before the 17th century world over. The reason, before that, there were very few common schools where there were many children studying. In fact, it's very interesting to note Abraham Lincoln in 1832, in his first political announcement, included morality as part of education. You read that line, you'll know, I desire to see a time when education, and by its means morality, sobriety, enterprise, and industry shall become much more general than at present. Now, this is an indication to tell us when common schools began, education became formal. Now, before that, there was education. Don't ask me if there was no education before that. It was there. There were private tutors as to what they were called. Children were taught, maybe in small groups. They did not go to a place where every child from the community was collected. There was no large school or there was no common school. And then whatever this teacher or guru or whomsoever, the guru Sishya principle or the teacher disciple principle, things which need to be told to the child was being told. But then when many children were accumulated in one place, many children were brought together, there was a necessity to implement something called moral education because it was, in a way, democracy which was getting expanded. Now, the disadvantage of democracy, it might be a little surprising for many of you. We have been given to think democracy is always advantageous. No, the disadvantage of democracy is democracy has the seeds of auto-destruction within itself. You know, when many people join together, you all must be aware of this fact, you know it better. If I tell you this is selling coal to Newcastle. When there is one single student, you just pick up one student and talk to that student, boy or girl, there's no problem. You always tend to think, oh, this boy is such a nice boy. But then 10 such nice boys together, you know what happens. You know, democracy becomes mobocracy. It's mob psychology. So every single individual is good. But then jointly, collectively, the same goodness or same intelligence, when it is accumulated, leads to something else. So democracy has seeds of auto-destruction within itself. When there was a necessity to bring in many children together, put them all in one place, then those people who are responsible for starting these common schools found out there was a necessity to put in some moral education into the minds of those same children who are being brought there. If they were not given moral education, these children could go haywire. And that was the reason why a formalized moral education became inherent of the schooling process itself. And then to facilitate this moral education, people who were related to religion, people who were clergymen or people who had some kind of, moral training in religion were brought in to impart moral education. That is how what we call as moral education today, based on the Western model, started somewhere in the 18th century. But then what happened later, the same factor of religion, which was responsible for bringing moral education into the folds of imparting knowledge, became the same factor which would also prevent moral education from being implemented in schools. Now, after 50 years or 100 years, people started saying, no, moral education has got lots of religiosity in it, so we cannot have moral education. It is making the child religious, so we need to have something which is different from religious moral education. And then slowly, various factors came up, various ideas came up, and people started resorting to what is called character education and not moral education. Now, I'm tracing this history for us to understand as to what level we are in and where we should start or restart. Now, we'll go back. Now, who are all the people who are involved in moral education? Before the teachers, the parents, the teachers, the schools, the curricula, the books, society, all members and components of the society. In other words, everyone or everything around the child is involved in imparting moral education. And what are the various methods by which moral education could be given to the child? Every way that you can think of or name. Norms, rules, rewards, punishments, codes of honor, concepts of relationship. Now you have a family, there is some kind of a concept of relationship, and the mother tells the child, every time an elder visits the family, you would have to say namaskaram, or you would have to say vanakkam, or something of that kind. Now all that puts in some focus on the moral behavior of the child. Methods of respect, cultural emphasis, societal equations. You don't sit before the elder person sits down. So many factors, like in a school, in a class, or even in a conference like this, a VIP walks in, it's very, very regular for the audience to stand up and then welcome the VIP, welcome the chief guest. You know, that kind of an atmosphere also puts in some seedling of moral respect, moral behavior. This is how I should behave and things, and so on. Now, how is moral education imparted? The same thing repeated, norms and rules, rewards, punishments, codes of honor. If you do this, you get an incentive. If you do not do this, you get a punishment. Now, all these are factors which go to add to the moral education. In other words, as the society evolved from the Stone Age man to the current Homo sapiens, as the society evolved, whatever was thought to be good for a collective lot stayed back. Whatever was thought to be harmful to a collective lot was slowly dispensed away. Now, we started with the question, what exactly is being moral and what exactly is morality? The definition is very simple. When there is a collective living, when people live in plurality, when you have many people in a society, respect each other, respect the other person's liberty of life, and then do things which will not harm everyone. This is how morality started. So it's a very simple thing. Being good will ultimately boil to that area where being good to myself and being good to others too. And this will also give another corollary, not being harmful to others. Then probably you can keep expanding, respect others. Understand that people around you also have a life. And it will go on and on. So basically, plurality or collective living led to factors of morality. Abiding by moral norms is very, very important in a pluralistic society. When the individual is alone, if there was, think of a hypothetical situation where probably there was only one child, one Shishya and one Guru, there was no necessity for all this moral education and telling this, telling that. Or even still prehistoric times when, just two people lived on the river bank. You did not have a collective society. You did not have an agrarian society. There were only few individuals. There was no necessity to tell them, do this, don't do this, no norms, no societal implementation. But then when people lived in groups, when people started getting collected in groups, there was a necessity for implementing certain norms and also tell them something about rewards and punishment with regard to those norms and their implementation. Now, it is very essential in moral education to emphasize these factors. Children will have to be told we live in an interdependent society. We might live in an independent country, we might live in a country which is being ruled by somebody else. All that does not matter. All that is political, but we are living in a society which is interdependent. No individual can live alone. No individual is an individual by himself. No one can say, no, I can live all by myself. For even my basic needs, I'm dependent on somebody else. If a farmer does not toil in some nook and corner of the country, I don't get my food. So it's very essential for the child to understand that we live in a society which is making everybody part of the complete whole. And then coexistence is the most essential feature of this society. There could be differences of opinions, there could be differences of taste, but everyone will have to exist in the same society. We cannot leave this society and run away. I cannot just run away. Moral education does not mean I can run away from a society. I'll give you a very, very well-known example. Look at you all know the example, but then look at it from a slightly different perspective. Most of you, I believe, will be aware of the circumstances in which Bhagavad Gita was told. To recap, it was on the battleground. There was a person by name Arjuna who suddenly had all kinds of confusions and doubts. Having come to the battleground, he suddenly started talking about leaving the battleground, and his, very justified question to Krishna was, Krishna, why should I fight with these people? These are all bad people. And if I fight with these bad people and then win over, what am I going to do? There was a tinge of self-justification in Arjuna's statement. That statement appeared as though Arjuna himself was the only one who was bothered about the dharma, and everyone else on the opposite side was adharmic. Now, it is not that you could run away from the society saying that I'm being moral. Coexistence is required. Arjuna could not just say, I'm the most moral person here, and then leave everything and go. So the child will have to understand coexistence is part of our life. Disagreements, differences in opinions can occur. That is where the issue comes. Where is moral education linked with religion, or where is that de-link required only when it comes to areas where there is a moral controversy? And people do not want to stick to one judgment. Somebody takes one judgment, it is not the same for the other person. So somewhere down the line, we would have to emphasize disagreements and differences in opinions will have to occur, and they can occur. Now this we've already seen. Now see what the educator Horace Mann had to say. By the elevating influences of good schools, the dark host of private vices and public crimes. So he was given to understand in the 19th century that vices and crimes prevailed amongst people who did not go to school, which now embitter domestic peace and stain the civilization of the age, might in 99 cases out of 100 be banished from the world. So he said people who go to good schools will be out of these crimes and vices. And why? These good schools will give them moral education. This is how moral education came in. Therefore, more common schools came in, longer duration of schooling, inclusion of history, literature, and biography in the school curricula. For many of us who might wonder as to why literature, history, and all came into the school curricula, because many of us in this age tend to think, what is the necessity to read history? What is the necessity to read literature? And I'm not very sure about the changing curricula, but then what I read 40 years ago or 35 years ago is not there in the textbooks anymore. There is no place for Shakespeare, there is no place for Whitman, there is no place for Milton, there is no place for Kamban, there is no place for Thiruvalluvar. All of them are gone with the wind. The reason we say, why should all this be memorized and learnt? What is the necessity for literature? And the emphasis on what are called science subjects, emphasis on the scientific principles has grown. And believe me, I'm with the medical students for the last 35 years of my life. And I know what happens when the cream comes to the professional colleges. And if I talk to them about literature or biography, everybody gives me a kind of a strange stare as to I'm some kind of extraterrestrial being. But all this was included history and literature was included as part of moral education because they thought bringing in all this into the curriculum, learn about some historic figure. It could be either way. It could be somebody who did something wonderful to the society, or it could be even somebody who did not do anything to the society. But then either way, the principles could be learnt. And morally uplifting thoughts in the copybook headings and notebook headings. You remember days when the copybooks had some kind of, praying hands, or helping hands are much better than praying hands, and something like that, like some kind of a heading where morally uplifting thoughts were given. So in a way, moral education was woven into the fabric of the schools. It was not a separate class. Moral education, of course, had 1 hour moral education every week and all that. That apart, it was kind of, woven into the warp and weft of the entire curriculum. Whatever subject was being taught, somewhere down the line, principles of morality were thrown here and there. However, all this warp and weft gave to the same problem, the problem that we discussed a little earlier. Moral education has lots of religiosity in it, seedlings of religiosity here and there. So religious touch will have to be has to be removed. That became the focus of objection, and the so-called intellectual, spiritual dimensions of human lives gained prominence. For those of us in India, this might be a little curious, but then world over, if you notice in the 19th century, the focus from moral education to spiritual and intellectual education shifted primarily because of 3 or 4 individuals. Individuals like Charles Darwin, Friedrich Nietzsche, and some of the political leaders of Europe and America, and of course, Sigmund Freud. Now, Charles Darwin, Nietzsche, Sigmund Freud, all these are people who emphasized on the intellectual aspect of the individual, saying religion has no role in the development of the intellectual aspect. And that is why the shift came. But, friends, I personally feel there is a necessity to understand moral education has no religious backing in it. To explicitly explain my point, I'll resort to a very, very, very old story that we all have learnt, or I believe most of us have learnt. There is one story, one indigenous local story here. The Kaka Vada. Many of us remember that story, right? I would resort to the vernacular because the story relates better. Party Vada Sutta. She had the vada for sale, and then the Kaka was very hungry. It was looking at all those delicious vadais. And then it was waiting for an opportunity, glided down, picked up one vada, went somewhere and sat. And then the Nari came. Nari saw the delicious vada. Party's vada should have been really delicious for even the Nari to smell that and come all the way from the wide jungles. And then the Nari wanted the vada. So it kind of, lured the Kaka, 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 nee paatu paadu, and then the Kaka, in the pretext of singing or in the real, falling a prey to all that came from the Nari, dropped the vada. Now, what has happened to the story in these years? The story has undergone a lot of metamorphosis. And today's Kaka is very intelligent. When the Nari says, Kaka, Kaka, paatu paadu, it shifts the vada to its legs and starts singing. And the nari is also grown intelligent, cleverer. Kaka kaka dance aadu. At which point of time the kaka shifts the vada from the legs to the beaks and then starts dancing. Now, this metamorphosis appears to be very good, allegedly very good, but does not involve principles of nature. For all of us who know something about birds and nature, it is a very, very small remembrance that crows belong to the most intelligent species amongst birds. If you take the crows, they belong to a family of intelligent birds. So you don't have to make them more intelligent. And the given situation of the story does not relate to certain areas of logic. You know, if you start questioning, the kaka has become intelligent when the nari talks like this, then there can be a questioning also, how did the nari come to this place? You know, it's in the wild jungles. Why did it come to the streets? And then there can be somebody who will say, oh, the wild animals have come to the streets, and then what was the government doing? Not removing those wild animals, but then letting the wild animal come to the habitated world. Now we'll have to understand certain areas of logic are not there in the story precisely because the emphasis is elsewhere. The reason why the story came, why was the story formulated? Not to make the crow more intelligent. Ultimately, what has happened in the last 50 years is the crows have grown intelligent, but then the human species has not. The story is for the human species and not for the crows. The crow is not going to come to your school and learn all this. Why do you want to make the crow intelligent? The basic necessity of the story was to impart certain moral values in the mind of the child. Thirudada. Thirudina, thirutichottu romba neram thangadu. That is point number 1. You have stolen it from the party and you think that you have stolen. How clever I am. I have taken it from the party without giving anything to the party. I have taken the vada. That's what the crow must have been thinking. And then the crow goes and sits there. It is a kind of an indirect information coming in the latter part of the story. Nee buddhisali nu nenacha, unaku oru buddhisali nari madri irupaan. That is all. The 2 principles involved in the story is, number 1, don't steal. Number 2, if you think you're clever, there is always a cleverer person, maybe in some other format. I may be good in something, but somebody else might be good in something else. And that's what she said. You will have to accept abundance. There is abundance in the world. Abundance need not be the same thing. It could be something else. When the crow thinks I'm clever, there is a cleverer species elsewhere. But then what have we done to the story? Thinking that we are taking away the religiosity of the story, thinking that we are taking away all the illogic from the story, we have made the crows grow more intelligent and ultimately lost the focus of why the story came into existence. Now this is what has happened to moral education. The necessity and the focus of moral education in the name of taking away religiosity or in the name of taking away illogic information has taken it to a different dimension where the focus is least understood. That is why I said I would prefer to have it as moral education and not necessarily you'll have to change the name to character education. Now it's very difficult when you're telling stories to a child wanting to say something about moral education. There could be some godheads coming in that. The story will have to be told to the child in such a way that the child would understand the concept. So in India, probably the story will have to be something different. In Japan, the story will have to be something different with a local flavor. Only then it's easy for the child to relate and understand. You cannot tell the child, you know what the globe is. If the child wants to know something about the globe, the child asks you a question as to what the globe is. What would be our answer? If it's a 2-year-old, the answer necessarily will have to be, you know what the globe is? You have your ball. The globe is a bigger ball. What is creativity or what is teaching? Creativity has a wonderful definition. What exactly is creativity? Many of us keep saying creativity, creativity. There is nothing new in creativity. Creativity is that simple formula wherein something which is already known is made and given in dimensions which are unknown, and something which is not known is given in dimensions which are known. தெரிஞ்சதை தெரியாதது மாதிரியும் தெரியாததை தெரிஞ்சது மாதிரியும் கொடுக்கறது தான் creativity. So to a small child, you will have to give something which is not known to the child in the form of something which is known. So there could be some elements of what is called religiosity. Now, if you would have to tell an Indian child, கருப்பா இருக்கலாமா? What is wrong if somebody is karupu? Then the Indian child probably will learn better if you say Krishna is karupu and Rama is karupu. So stealing away that element of religiosity to the core may not work out very well. This is what probably is my personal feeling, and not probably my personal feeling. That is my personal feeling, and probably I leave it to the floor for their own innovations, not for discussion, but then for innovation, because you will have to handle the child that comes to you in your own way, probably, adapt to local conditions. Moral education needs to be re-emphasized as an admixture of cultural, nationalistic, and societal values. Now, timelessness of moral education is what we are supposed to be ultimately focusing on today. Why has moral education become difficult these days? I suppose there was an earlier discussion on the reduction in the moral power of children, moral degradation and things like that. We'll have to understand, 50 years ago, the child did not have much exposure. But then today there's a lot of admixture of various values. Cultural values, nationalistic values. When I was in school, I remember there was no television. And probably first few years of college, I remember seeing all that black and white TV. And madam might remember those days when Madras Doordarshan started. It was not called Doordarshan, it was something else. When all that started, we used to have an antenna sticking out of the houses from all those terraces, and then there was also a kind of antenna thirudan for some time. It's my personal experience. I'll tell you, the first time I went to Doordarshan Kendra, I didn't know how to go. That was way back in 1976, I suppose, when I just completed school. And then we have always seen that huge tower, the tall tower. And somewhere getting down on the Marina Beach area, getting down from the bus on the Marina Beach area, Madras University, I just started walking along with my friend. I said, come, let's walk towards the tower, we'll find the way. So I still remember we crossed, crawled, jumped over a fence and all that, thinking that is how we should go. And then I still vividly remember the kind of discussion we had on the foreground of the Doordarshan Kendra. We were trying to ask one of the staff, when Shobna Ravi reads the news, where will she sit and read? We were thinking that she'll sit there. And then we were also kind of, imagining sometimes when Vishalam sits and read the news, her hair is flying this way, that way. That must have been a windy day. The kind of imagination, I still remember the days when I imagined, on the Padayakalat radio petti. I always used to imagine P. Sushila was sitting inside and singing. And believe me, for some years in school, I nurtured a kind of animosity towards L.R. Ishwari. I had not even seen L.R. Ishwari that time. Primarily because suddenly there will be an announcement saying, Ippodu Padubavar L.R. Ishwari. So I always imagine L.R. Ishwari walked up, pushed P. Sushila down, and then she sat there and sang. So I kind of had, why is this lady coming and pushing her off? It was my imagination. But today, I find a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old knowing so many things about these electronic gadgets, so much about other countries. So it's very difficult avoiding all this admixture. One of the reasons why we find there is a shift in moral education is because of the admixture. Why the question, what is morality, is because what we used to think as moral in India has slowly changed because lots of other influences have come in. And I'm trying to tell you, it is impossible for us to make everything back to what it was 40 years ago or 50 years ago. We will have to accept this admixture. We will have to accept that all this will become more and more. There is no pure gene race at all in the world today. There was a time when we were talking about inbreeding and genes and things like that. There is no single race in the world which is pure bred. Every gene is mixed with everybody. From now on, it's very difficult to get, even for experimentation purposes, one pure gene. So we will have to accept this and then probably work out our moral education on the basis of all this admixture. Greater peer pressure. My mother would not permit me to play with the neighbor children after 6 o'clock in the evening. Come back home, sit and read. Today it's difficult. Peer pressure. So much of peer pressure. I see it with my first MBBS and second MBBS students. Expansile and inclusive social media. Now we are in a time where for everything there is a reaction. Newton is becoming more and more truer. For every story there is one counter story. For every statement there is one counter statement. So if a teacher is going to give them one story on moral education today, the child will come back with a counter story tomorrow and say, teacher, what are you going to tell me about this? The same kaka will become, I remember there were other versions of this kaka story. Like, somebody was trying to say, the kaka stole the vade. Forgetting, the story is focusing on the element of stealing. But then, down the years, the story had got migrated, metamorphosed in different ways. So somebody vehemently argued, some school boy, he vehemently argued. He said, what are you people saying? Why are you always saying that the nari is bad? The kaka is also bad. He said, yes, that is precisely the story. But then the value was lost. And he said, I'll modify the story. You know how? The party was there, party was sitting, and then there was a jug of water. And then the party required some water, for making more vades and all that, to wash the vessels and all that. She needed some water. So the kaka, what did the kaka do? The kaka, in another story, you remember, it started putting, pebbles. So slowly it put pebbles and made the water come up so that party could easily take water. It was helping the party so that the party gave the kaka one vade. Or you can even, then I said that boy, okay, fine, you can even modify it this way. There was no fuel. You can take it whichever way you want. Party did not have subsidy for LPG or whatever. There was no fuel. And then the kaka went here, there, everywhere, picked up some, sticks and brought it so that party could have her adupu boiling. You can make any versions, but then don't lose track of the original value. So you can make a communist version of kaka, or you can make a social version of kaka. You can make capitalist kaka, whichever way you want. But then the focus will have to be remembered, probably taking in all these factors of cultural admixture. Extraneous influences in intraneous surroundings. This is what we are fighting against. All of us are fighting against. Those were the times when we said, if a child goes out the child mingles with the wrong kind of people and then probably, get all that influence. I still remember one of my aunts saying, they were living in Madurai and then my cousins were also in Madurai, and she always used to say, the child will come back with, my cousins will talk all kind of rubbish, the language that we normally admonish. And then she'll say, இது எங்கேயாவது ஊர் சுற்றிட்டு அங்கே இருக்கிற பாஷையெல்லாம் கற்றுண்டு வரும். This is what even today mothers say. They learn all kinds of wrong words because they go. You cannot prevent that. It's not that the child goes out and learns. Today you have all the extraneous factors coming into a drawing room and then giving you all that influence. So within your own four walls, there is a very, very easy way of learning all that should not be learnt. So probably the teachers will have to fight that also. And what can we do? So in that context, with all these factors in mind, we need to review moral education. I agree moral education is timeless. Moral education is required today more than what it was required 40 years ago or 50 years ago. If there are any policy makers here, my very, very humble request to you, please do not take away moral education from the curriculum or the syllabus. Call it by whatever name you want. If you think the name has to be given a different connotation, fine, but then it has to be there. It has to be given in every subject. History, literature, biography, all that gives some amount of moral education. When you talk about a king building chowdhuries, it's a kind of information to the child saying, yes, this king was benevolent. When you talk about, people always ask, என்னைக்கோ அசோகர் மரம் நட்டதுக்கு எதுக்கு இன்னைக்கு emphasis? We always used to have that line, King Ashoka was so benevolent, then he was compassionate to all his citizens and he did this, he did that. But then somewhere it's going in, yes, I should not fell trees. Trees are required. Trees are part of nature. Somewhere it's going in. Maybe, it's not a direct effect, but then moral education is after all indirect. It cannot be direct. You cannot tell somebody, this is good thing, do this. No, human tendency is, I will not do. Once again, resorting to someone's statement which we all know, I presume most people know here Tamil. There's a very beautiful statement in Athishudi. The first line in Athishudi, let's not go to other lines. The first line, it says, Aram Seyya Virumbu. Why did Avai say Aram Seyya Virumbu? She could have stopped Aram Sey. Right? That would have been a smaller statement. And that's being told to a small little child. Small little child, isn't it easier to give a brief statement, shorter statement, than making a longer statement? And Avai did not know this. She could have said Aram Sei, but she said Aram Seyya Virumbu. And invariably, a child of 3 or 4 years cannot say Virumbu correctly. Lilimbu. Lari varadu. Lali தான் வரும். So விரும்பு அந்த வார்த்தையே கஷ்டம். Why did Avai emphasize on virumbu for such a small child? If only you tell Aram Sei, the human mind will revolt. முடியல. செய்யணும்னு ஆசைப்பட்டேன், பணம் இல்லை, circumstances இல்லை. You say something, however we are educated, please think of those situations, introspect. புது பெயிண்ட், வாட் வில் வி டூ? அப்படி தொட்டு பார்த்துட்டு ஒட்டுதான்னு பார்த்தேன், காஞ்சிடுச்சான்னு பார்த்தேன். All of us have that, that kind of, it's a human tendency, we all have that. புதுசாக வார்னிஷ் பண்ணியிருந்தா உடன் ஃபர்னிச்சர் அப்படி லேசாக தொட்டு பார்த்து, it's a very human factor. You cannot do away with your biological factors. There are certain things which will be there. So if you tell somebody, do this, the immediate reaction from at least 60% of people will be, I will not do. Why should I do? Tell me one reason for me to do this. Avai was a wonderful psychologist. She said, Aram seyya virumbu. You first have the tendency to do. You may not have the money. If you have the attitude, the day you get the money, you will be able to give others. If you do not have the attitude, even if you have loads and loads of money, you will not do that. So there was a kind of psychological element running in that statement. And moral education precisely will have to bank on the psychology of children. So necessarily, you will have to have a kind of infusive atmosphere. What is this infusive atmosphere? Child learns morality not from the moral education class. The child learns morality from everything around. So in an infusive atmosphere, the emphasis is on the staff, the teachers, people around to be role models to the child. It's a kind of a role modeling. The child learns things as they see them around. And teachers will have to kind of give an idea to the child that moral education does not necessarily come from one chapter in the textbook. You will have to have moral values, looking at things around, include everything. Good habits, good outlook, character building, all that has to be part of every subject. And also, moral education is not a competitor, it is not an ancillary to other subjects. Down the line, what had become one of the accidents that fell moral education was this. Somebody is very good in acquiring marks, somebody is very good in acquiring skills, does not matter if that student is a little down in character too. Now this is a principle that happened not only in schools and amongst children. This is a principle that happened all over. You know, some of you might understand the statement when we generally say, அவரு ஒரு மாதிரி கொஞ்சம் ஒரு கொஞ்சம் எக்ஸென்ட்ரிக் தான், பட் அவ்வளோ ஸ்கில்ஸ் இருக்கே, திறமை இருக்கே, எக்ஸென்ட்ரிசிட்டி பரவாயில்ல. So what happens, like you're trying to justify, and then what happens to the child looks at it, this kind of a statement being made in school, this kind of a statement being made at home, statement in the society at large. What is wrong? If I am eccentric, I will be considered big. No, the other thing happens. If I am eccentric, I'll be considered big. So we'll have to somewhere down the line tell them moral education is not a competitor. It is not ancillary to some subject. You learn mathematics well, moral education is only a small thing, it's an ancillary. No, somebody learns only moral education, they can do away with the other things. No, this is not a competitor. Moral education is not a subject, it's not a separate subject. Moral education is part of the whole. It is to be there all over. Moral education principles, therefore, should be inbuilt within the curricula, and morally inclined covert behavior will have to be implemented. Now, this is where the schools and teachers' responsibility comes in at large. You have an explicit, overt curriculum is different. But then this is inherent, this is hidden, this is there inside, but not seen as moral education. It has to be inbuilt in the curricula, it has to be inbuilt in the behavior of the teachers, it has to be inbuilt in the behavior of the staff, it has to be inbuilt in the behavior of the norms of the school. There are certain things, certain norms, certain rules in the school. I'll tell you one example. Like, we had a professor, when I was doing my postgraduate studies, we had a professor by name Cecilia, a very nice, wonderful lady. And she was a Christian, but then very religious too. Very nice lady. I remember one day, as postgraduates in the medical area, we are also kind of teachers. Even as postgraduates, we start doing teaching work. So we'll be, kind of double-edged. So one day, in the open practical hall, I and my colleague, we were telling her something and telling about the undergraduate students' behavior, trying to tell her that the undergraduate students had not performed well and things like that. And she said, call that student. One particular student, she said, call. So my colleague who was standing next to me wanted to pass that information to me. She said, Sudha, call that fellow. This is the statement she made, call that fellow. Immediately, I still remember, Professor Cecilia bursted out. She said, come to my room, both of you. We were wondering, she wanted to meet that student and now she is calling us to her room, and then when will she meet that student? We said, ma'am, we'll get that boy. She said, come to my room. She took us to the room and said, how dare you use that term fellow? You should have said, call that student. Give respect. You said, call that fellow. What kind of derogatory language is this? This is the covert behavior. This happened sometime in 1984-85. And I still remember, when I talk to my students, I still remember at the back of my mind, Professor Cecilia walks down. And I could see the roll of her eyes. Whenever I utter a single word to any student for the last so many years, I could still visualize the roll of her eyes. So this is the kind of atmosphere. And that day she instilled that principle in my mind. So this probably is the covert behavior, covert curriculum that has to be established by every school or every individual who is trying out moral education. Friends, as I told you at the beginning, I've just thrown certain stray thoughts because I very sincerely believe there is no single syllabus or curriculum for moral education. No. There can be no single curriculum, no single syllabus. You would have to innovate, you would have to take in local circumstances, local situations, but then not lose focus of what is required. And old stories from any religion, stories from any fold of life, probably would go a long way in imparting moral education. And why stories? Why do we always say stories? Why can it not be something else? My friend here will know stories catch up so well. That is all. Simple. You tell something in the story form, it catches up well. If it is not in the story form, it takes a longer time to percolate, and then it's also very easily volatile. So I've just thrown certain stray thoughts, and I wish that moral education gets more impetus and more emphasis in the days to come. Thank you.
Would you mind taking?
I'm standing here for that.
Okay. Anybody?
Questions, opinions, differences? Yeah, there's somebody who's wanting to say something there.
This is going to be little long. Madam, recently one of my friends, she was asking, Teachers Day வருதே என்ன பண்ணலாம் அப்படின்னு ஏதோ ஒரு பர்டிகுலர் ஸ்கூலை பற்றி. நான் அன்றைக்கி அவங்ககிட்ட சொன்னேன், பெரிய உபநிஷத் அந்த மாதிரி எல்லாம் அந்த குழந்தைங்களுக்கு சொல்ல வேண்டாம், ஆத்திச்சூடியை படிச்சுன்னு சொல்லுன்னு சொல்லிட்டு போனேன். நீங்கள் சொன்னது சடனாக ஒரு ஸ்பார்க் மாதிரி இருக்குது.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
I was truly touched by one of the lines about not forgetting the old stories, not leaving behind all the mythological tales, etc., which is already a wealth that has been downloaded to us, given to us, it's better to actually understand that a little deeper instead of avoiding it completely, because just because it has a religious connotation, and the word religion itself has become such a derogatory term today. The loss of that, I personally feel, is actually leading to much more misery, because there is already a wealth which is all around us. It's better to understand it a little better and look at it from different perspectives, and then weave it into the entire system. That's also one of my humble endeavors of translating temples into classrooms these days, because there's an architectural wealth, there are symbols, it's all visible around us, and also the mythological tales. So I think that was the biggest message that I'm carrying back, because everybody was overruling that and saying that's how moral education actually has to be brought in. Thanks a lot for the eye-opener.
Thank you, ma'am. Just a point to add here. See, for that matter, I think it's a little beyond the purview of this discussion, so I didn't touch upon that earlier. Why did religion come? If you go back and think, why at all religion came? You know, if it was a single individual and his or her relationship with the God, there was no necessity for religion. It was only because of a collective living, and then everybody, all that group was following the same God or same Godhead, or was trying to pray or worship or whatever. There was a necessity for bringing in certain norms. So religion came in because of plurality, and then doing away religion in something which is necessary for plurality is, you know, the paradox of the situation. And this paradox came in because, again, plurality. You know, many people start thinking about the same thing. There are different angles, different perspectives, and then somebody suddenly says, no, I am right. So this probably will have to be thought of. As you rightly said, we'll have to dwell little deeper into all these things and why all these principles came in, and probably, you know, innovate. And yes, thank you.
I just wanted to add to what you have mentioned and what she has mentioned about this word, that religion as such, it's people want to keep it aside. So I really appreciate that you brought it out and you stick to that. The other thing, when we are talking about this education today, soul search, the previous speaker was also speaking about that. And since you mentioned about Bhagavad Gita, just want to mention and get your views on that. Because in Bhagavad Gita, it says, among the Vidyas, I am the Atma Vidya. So on timelessness of these moral values, what is your view on that? Because we are not having that in our education system as such. So what is your view of the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita? Among the Vidyas, I am the Atma Vidya, and where are we today to this soul search? Thanks.
Sir, putting it in a very, very simple way, probably every other Vidya will have to mature or take the individual towards the ultimate of Atma Vidya. See, it's very simple. Let's not go into all the jargon. Let's keep it this way. I learned something today. In the initial phases of learning, I do not know whatever I'm learning, whatever subject X, I do not know everything about X. So I'm trying to resort to books or references and things like that. But then, as teachers, you would have known this. The first time you start teaching a particular subject or a particular chapter, you know what, there are two ways. What you would do is learn a chapter from a book and then probably want to say everything to your pupil, because whatever you have learned, you want to tell them. You know, over the course of years, as you mature as a teacher, you would know where to eliminate. Certain things are required for somebody, certain things are not required. I've always wondered, my classes in the earlier phases used to be 45 minutes, 60 minutes. Now my classes have become 20 minutes, 15 minutes, because I know what is required for that target group I'll give. The rest of it I'll eliminate. So that is in the initial phase. But then, as you become more and more professed with that, you feel you've taken it in, you've internalized, you're churning, and then you've developed your own ways. I believe the maturity of every other Vidya into Atma Vidya is that you learn everything, You learn about the universe, you learn about the fishes, you learn about the stars, you learn about everything, every other vidya. Then as the churning goes on inside, somewhere, the churning will lead to realization and probably lead to that stage, God is within you, God is not outer, then Atma Vidya, self-realization, Atma Sakshatkaram, whatever, it is that level of maturity. So everything ultimately, maybe, from this level it has to start, but then lead you to that ultimate.
May I share this, madam? I'm a lawyer practicing in the High Court. It's an observation. I've been practicing for 25 years right now. We see a lot of litigation in family courts and the Mahila courts. And the people on the wrong side of the law are not illiterates anymore. When you go into the cyber crimes, the people who do the mistake are the ones who are supposed to be the best of the educated or the gold medalist. Maybe the moral science lessons have been lacking. Now the family courts are flooded with a lot of cases. I see clients coming and telling me, certain girls coming and telling me, இத மாதிரி சொல்லி கொடுக்க யாருமே இல்லை மேடம் எங்களுக்கு. That's what, when I teach them something, when I tell them something, இப்படி தான் பண்ணணும் அப்படின்னா, they have told. There were teachers for me to teach. My parents were there to teach. There are a lot of people to teach us and we were receiving also. It's not that you teach, there is not also not receivers. The present generation, not the present one, we have lost one big gap. The parents today are also need of moral education. The parents are the people coming and standing in the wrong side of the law. Today they come and see in the family courts, it's hardly 22, 25, below 30 they come and stand there. It's simple ego and the children and losing. When you go for the juvenile, and the juvenile are people, real innocent people who come before. There are 5 or 7 lawyers come here today, and it's pathetic, and we can point out, if you tell the name of the school or college, we'll tell whether this case will stand or not. I know which school. If you tell the name of the school, I'll tell you if the guy has done mistake or not. Harassment against women, if I tell this guy is from this college, I'll not believe this guy would have done it. Because certain schools still impart this kind of education, and where they come out shining. I am like this today only because I'm product of Children's Garden. I'm very proud of it. I have been tutored this way. My teachers, yesterday I told they are my second mothers. Even today I feel so very comfortable. I had my cases pending there. I had to be there. I was just on the phone. I was just consoling. Oh no, I'm coming, I'm there in a meeting. It's a simple ego clash. I told Junior, you can take care of it. Because there is no one to tell people what is it. The parents have done the mistakes. One generation we have become ATM machines. Luckily my parents and my school, my alma mater has made me to be good citizens. I pray the future at least for this country be good. Otherwise, family courts, we have 8 family courts now. And it's not happy that we have more family courts, more work. And the Mahila courts, we have special cells being created day in and day out. We are not happy because of that. We want less litigation. Less litigation only will improve this country. The Constitutional Court, the Supreme Court is working on the sexual harassment cases and the matrimonial issues. They have to sit and decide on the constitutional matter. Unfortunate, we are flooded with all simple ego. As Uncle pointed out, it's an ego clash that has come in, and the future generation, it's my observation. Thank you so much for
Thank you, ma'am. Why Mahila courts and family courts? The number of pendency of cases. 40 years ago, how many of you, or 30 years ago, maybe a little later also, how many of you would have resorted to the legal remedy if you had failed in a subject? Right? Forget Mahila courts, forget family courts. Today, and I come from a area where, every document, I always tell my staff, my junior colleagues, please keep all documents very clear. Personally, I am one who does not believe in recording attendance. I don't believe. If your classes are good, the students come. At least, the professional colleges. I'm not in a school. But then, I'm forced to maintain very, very clear records of the attendance, internal assessment, this, that, and all that, precisely because we do not know which student, which parent will go to the court at what point of time. We cannot, fail a student because the student had not performed well. I'm not wanting to fail a student, but if a student had not performed well, he or she cannot be failed. The staff will have to think not twice, thrice, but then 100 times, because any time the student will go to the court for everything. So resorting to this kind of, why has this come? Madam, one single factor which probably we'll have to think of. Moral education gives you a collective approach. Moral education makes you responsible for the other person also. You try and respect the other person. That is what is morality. Good. Being good does not mean I am good alone. I have to respect the other person. Everybody has a right to live. But somewhere down the line, in the last 40 years, giving emphasis on the individual has become more. நான் நல்லா இருந்தா போதும். You see the traffic on the road. நான் வண்டி ஓட்டுனா போதும். நீ ஓட்டுறியா கீழே விழறியா, I'm not bothered. And what do we say? Traffic is so heavy, இடிச்சிட்டா என்ன பண்ண முடியும்? போனா போகுது போ. So it's not that இடிச்சிட்டா போனா போகுது is a different aspect. It is not tolerance. It is kind of, I don't have time to go to the lawyer's area. I don't have time to go to the court, so I'm just leaving it because நான் நாளைக்கு இடிச்சாலும் somebody will not bother about it. So it's a kind of, emphasis on the individual and more of individualism. I have to live and I'll do anything for my survival. So the ATM ellame, we used to have a joke on the stage. We used to always say this, or school, I'm not meaning any particular school. This is a joke that used to run around. ஒரு ஸ்கூலில் ஒரு பையன் பக்கத்து பையனோட பென்சில் எடுத்துட்டான். திருடுனான்னு சொல்ல மாட்டேன், சின்ன பையன், he doesn't know, he just picked out. இந்த பென்சில் எடுத்துட்டான், அவன் என் பென்சிலை கொடுக்க மாட்டேன் போ, நான் வச்சுப்பேன். child at that age does not know, இது திருட்டுன்னெலாம் தெரியாது. எனக்கு இது வேணும், நான் வச்சுப்பேன், இது எனக்கு தான் வேணும். So somewhere the other boy went and complained to the teacher. இந்த பையன் எடுத்துட்டான் என்னோட பென்சில், அவனை பொறுத்த வரைக்கும் இது திருட்டு, இந்த பையன் என் பென்சிலை திருடிட்டான். So the teacher did not know, he was not able to tell this boy, அது கொடுத்துருன்னா கொடுக்க மாட்டேங்கிறான். So the teachers kind of said, உங்கள் அப்பாவை வர சொல்லு. மறுநாள் காத்தால the அப்பா கேம், உங்கள் பையன் இந்த மாதிரி பக்கத்து பையனோட பென்சில் எடுத்துட்டான். Without even completely listening to what the teacher was trying to tell, அந்த பாதி சென்டென்ஸ் கேட்டோடனே the father bursted out. ஏண்டா பாவி, இன்னொத்த பென்சிலெல்லாம் நீ ஏன் எடுக்கிற, நான் தான் ஆஃபீஸ்லேருந்து நிறைய கொண்டு வந்து வீட்டில் கட்ட வச்சுருக்கேன். So what kind of an information goes to the child now? ஆஃபீஸில் திருடலாம், ஏன்னா அது யாரோட சொத்தோ. See, the ultimate, what do we do? யாரோட சொத்தோ, காமன் ப்ராப்பர்ட்டி என்ன வேணாலும் பண்ணலாம். என்னோட ப்ராப்பர்ட்டி I'll have to safeguard. But if it's common property, if it's government's property, if we keep discussing on this will go somewhere. So let's not discuss further. But then this is what is happening. More emphasis on the individual, and what is common can be destroyed. Mr. Ramasamy would remember, there's a statement in Mahabharatam which, has been told to many of us. We all know that, but then we have forgotten. For the benefit of a village, you can sacrifice one family. For the benefit of a land, you can sacrifice one village. Like that is the attitude that prevailed. ஒரு individual pona paravalla, but everybody has to be good. So I can give out certain things, I can leave out certain things. I would not want to use the term sacrifice, but then for want of a better term, I would say I can sacrifice something for the sake of 40 of us being comfortable. But then the emphasis now has shifted, and that's what has resulted in all these things.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sudha. I think 1 hour kind of flew by. Probably we can give 2 days seminar completely to her, covering all the topics. She can bring out all the facets about education and educators. I now invite, now it's, I think everybody from other schools also know, the moment we say Akka, it means Ms. Shakuntala Sharma, to come and felicitate Dr. Sudha.
Thank you for the patient listening. Thank you.